For more than 2 decades, one man built an entire ministry around a single, uncompromising message that secular music, and hip-hop in particular, was a spiritual battlefield, and that Christians who listened to it were flirting with witchcraft. That man is Pastor Craige Lewis, and right now, his name is everywhere online, not because of a sermon, but because of a scandal that his own followers are struggling to process. In the past few weeks, allegations of multiple extramarital affairs have surfaced against him, along with claims, still unverified, that a hard drive exists containing audio, video, and photographic material tied to those accusations. Before we go any further, here's the most important sentence in this entire video. As of right now, none of this has been independently confirmed. No formal legal proceeding has established any of it as fact, and Lewis has not been reported to have issued a detailed public response addressing the specifics. What we're covering today is a fast-moving, unresolved controversy, and we're going to walk through it the way it deserves to be walked through, carefully, with sourcing, and without pretending speculation is proof. So let's start with who Craige Lewis actually is. Because if you didn't grow up in a certain corner of American evangelical culture, this name might not mean much to you. But if you did, especially anywhere between the mid-2000s and the 2010s, there's a good chance you've heard him, or heard of him, or watched a bootleg DVD of one of his seminars passed around a youth group. Lewis is the founder of EX Ministries and the longtime leader of the Adamant Believers Council, a congregation based in North Richland Hills, Texas, his signature project. The one that made him a household name in evangelical youth ministry circles was a seminar series called The Truth Behind Hip-Hop. It wasn't a quiet academic critique. It was fire and brimstone theater. Lewis argued at length and with total conviction that hip-hop as a genre was spiritually compromised at its root, that its rhythms, its imagery, and its industry connections were tied to witchcraft and demonic influence, and that young Christians needed to reject it entirely, sometimes literally burning their CDs as an act of spiritual cleansing. For a generation of kids raised in strict Christian households, this wasn't a fringe opinion. It was gospel, delivered with the kind of certainty that made parents nod along and made teenagers either terrified or secretly rebellious. What made Lewis's platform so powerful wasn't just the message, it was the framing. He didn't present himself as a guy with an opinion on music. He presented himself as someone with spiritual discernment other people lacked. Someone who could see the hidden hand of the enemy working through culture, and someone whose job was to protect the flock from deception they couldn't see for themselves. That's a specific kind of authority. It's not just trust me because I'm your pastor. It's trust me because I can see what you cannot. And that kind of authority, when it's built over 20+ years, creates an enormous amount of trust and an enormous amount of risk, because the entire structure depends on the person at the top actually being who they claim to be. Which brings us to now. In the past several weeks, a wave of allegations has spread rapidly across Christian commentary channels, independent creators, and social media, claiming that Lewis engaged in multiple extramarital affairs. According to reporting from outlets covering the story, including Primetimer, multiple women have reportedly come forward with accusations. Independent online ministries and commentary channels, including one called the BCV, or Book Chapter Verse Channel, have been central to circulating claims about this alleged hard drive, supposedly containing audio recordings, video, and photographs that would substantiate the accusations. It's important to be precise about the language here, because precision is exactly what tends to get lost once something goes viral. What's been reported so far is that live streams and online commentary have referenced this hard drive and previewed snippets from it on various platforms. That is different from independently verified, forensically authenticated evidence being presented through a formal process. Both things can be true at once, that something significant may genuinely exist, and that we, as outside observers, do not yet have the ability to confirm its authenticity, its chain of custody, or its full context. This distinction matters enormously, and not because we're trying to protect anyone from accountability. It matters because the entire history of viral scandal culture, especially inside tight-knit religious communities, is full of cases where partial information, cropped screenshots, and secondhand claims spiraled into certainty long before the full picture existed. Sometimes that certainty turns out to be justified. Sometimes it doesn't. The only responsible position, when you're standing at the beginning of a story like this, rather than the end of it, is to report what has actually been claimed, by whom, and through what channel, and to resist the urge to fill in the gaps with assumption. Now, here's where the story gets more complicated, because this isn't actually the first time Lewis's personal conduct has come under public scrutiny. Similar rumors reportedly circulated around 2012, more than a decade ago. At the time, according to accounts from supporters and observers, those earlier claims were largely dismissed within his community as gossip, unsubstantiated talk that didn't have the kind of momentum or purported documentation that this current wave does. That history is being invoked constantly right now in online discussions by critics who argue it establishes a pattern, and by defenders who argue that dismissed rumors from over a decade ago prove nothing except that people have been trying to tear him down for years. Both of those interpretations are being made in real time by people who, again, do not have access to verified evidence. The existence of a prior rumor doesn't confirm a current allegation, but it also isn't irrelevant, because it shapes how his community is reacting to what's happening now, and it's part of why this particular round of allegations is landing so much harder than a first-time accusation might. Let's talk about that reaction, because it's arguably the most revealing part of this entire situation. Within Lewis's own congregation and across the wider online Christian community, this has sparked genuinely fierce debate. Some commentary, referenced on platforms like Facebook, frames this as a moment of institutional reckoning, describing what's happening as a kind of takedown of a ministry that many feel has operated for years without meaningful outside accountability. Other voices, including from within Christian media circles, have described becoming aware of the allegations and the surrounding uproar, and have urged the community to slow down, to wait for Lewis himself to respond in detail, and to avoid rushing to conclusions based on secondhand claims and viral clips. And then there's a third camp, and it might be the largest one, made up of people who are calling for something more structural than either condemnation or defense. They're calling for institutional accountability, meaning some kind of formal process, whether internal to his ministry or external, that actually investigates the claims rather than leaving the entire question to be litigated in the court of social media. That three-way split is worth sitting with for a second, because it's not really about Lewis specifically. It's about a much bigger, much older tension inside independent, personality-driven ministries. When a church or a ministry is built primarily around one charismatic leader's voice, rather than around a denominational structure with its own oversight mechanisms, there often isn't a clear, pre-existing process for what happens when serious allegations surface against that leader. There's no board with real independent authority in a lot of these cases. There's no external body with subpoena power or investigative standing. There's the leader, there's the congregation, and increasingly, there's the internet, which moves faster than any formal process ever could, and which doesn't wait for due process before rendering a verdict. And this is where the hypocrisy critique comes in, because it's been raised repeatedly and it's worth engaging with honestly rather than dismissing it. Critics have pointed out that Lewis spent over 2 decades building his entire public identity around exposing what he characterized as hidden moral and spiritual corruption in secular culture. His whole brand was rooted in the idea of moral accountability, of seeing through deception, of calling out compromise wherever it existed. So when allegations of personal moral failure surface against the person who built that brand, the criticism writes itself. How can someone position themselves for years as a spiritual watchman, warning an entire generation about hidden corruption in music and culture, while allegedly living a double life himself? That's not an unfair question to ask. It's actually one of the most natural questions a community can ask when a moral authority figure faces serious allegations. But it's also worth remembering that the strength of that rhetorical point doesn't, on its own, establish the truth of the underlying allegations. A hypocrisy critique can be completely fair to raise as a matter of public discourse, while the actual facts of the affair allegations remain unresolved. Those are 2 separate conversations happening at the same time, and a lot of the online discourse right now blends them together in a way that can make claims feel more proven than they currently are. So where does that leave things right now, in terms of what we actually verifiably know? We know that Lewis is a long-established figure in evangelical youth ministry, founder of EX Ministries, and leader of the Adamant Believers Council in North Richland Hills, Texas. We know his reputation was built primarily on the truth behind hip-hop seminar series and its message that secular hip-hop culture carried hidden spiritual danger. We know that in recent weeks, allegations of multiple extramarital affairs have circulated widely online, reportedly involving multiple women. We know that independent creators and commentary channels, including the BCV Channel, have played a central role in spreading claims about a hard drive said to contain supporting audio, video, and photographic material. Though that material's authenticity has not been independently established in the reporting available. We know that similar, less substantiated rumors surfaced around 2012 and were largely dismissed at the time. And we know that the current allegations have caused visible fracture within his congregation and across the wider online Christian community, with some calling for patience, some calling for resignation, and many calling for some kind of formal accountability process. What we don't know, and what it's important to be honest about not knowing, is whether the specific allegations are true, whether the alleged hard drive contains what it's claimed to contain, whether it will ever be presented through any kind of verifiable or formal process, and how Lewis himself, or his ministry's leadership structure, will ultimately respond. Those are the open questions, and they matter, because how they get answered will say a lot, not just about one pastor, but about how independent ministries handle moments like this when there isn't a built-in system of accountability waiting to catch a crisis. There's a broader pattern worth naming here too, because this isn't the first time something like this has played out, and it won't be the last. Independent, personality-centered ministries have exploded in reach over the last 2 decades, largely because of platforms like YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram, which let a single charismatic voice build an audience in the millions without ever needing the institutional backing of a denomination or a governing body. That same lack of institutional backing. The thing that made it possible for someone like Lewis to build an independent platform and speak with total authority for over 20 years is often the exact same thing that leaves a congregation with nowhere to turn when serious allegations surface. There's no bishop to appeal to. There's no denominational ethics board with the standing to formally investigate. There's just the leader, the audience, and whatever process, if any, gets improvised in real time. And when that vacuum exists, social media rushes in to fill it, for better and for worse. Sometimes that means real accountability finally reaches people who evaded it for years. Sometimes it means reputations get shaped, permanently, by claims that were never fully verified in the first place. If you followed Lewis's ministry over the years, or if this is the first time you're hearing his name, the honest takeaway from where things stand right now is this. Serious allegations have been made. They involve a figure whose entire public identity was built on moral certainty, and the online Christian community is genuinely split on how to respond. What happens next? Whether there's a formal response from Lewis, whether any additional evidence surfaces through a verifiable channel, whether his ministry's leadership takes any formal action, is going to determine how this story is remembered. Until then, the responsible thing for anyone watching this unfold is to hold the difference between allegation and proof, to pay attention to who is actually reporting what, and to resist the pull of a narrative that feels satisfying before it's actually been established as true. We'll be watching this story and we'll update if and when there's a verified development. If you want to stay informed as this continues to unfold, subscribe and we'll bring you the next update the moment there's something concrete to report.